Schoolhouse, yes.
School bells.
That's good.
School bells. This is a special story about a special building, special school that happens to be in Cortland County, New York. It's up near Skaneateles Lake. It doesn't look like your usual image of what you would like to be a one-room school. But there is a one-room school within the building as well as a library. The school is through the left door, the library is through the right side door. This project started with Mr. Grant Van Sant, an attorney for the town of Scott and an attorney in Cortland. He approached me at work in the mid-1970s about a peculiar genealogy that was needed to possibly save a building in the town of Scott. It was possibly the last one-room school in Cortland County. It's very possibly the last public one-room school in New York State. Mr. Van Sant gave me the information relative to the problem, and it was involved with this deed. The deed was in 1856, and it was one given by Samuel and his wife Cornelia Scott to the school district number 4 trustees. It was for the site of a schoolhouse. It was only 52 rods of land, and the caveat in the deed at the bottom is that he gave the land as long as it shall be held and improved for the purpose and accommodation of a school. The school closed in 1968 and went under the Homer, it had been under the Homer School District, but they took over the education of the children in Glen in 1968, so that this deed made the ownership of the property peculiar. It reverted to Samuel and Cornelia Scott, both of whom had died 100 years before 1968. And so what was needed were quitclaim deeds from descendants of Samuel and Cornelia Scott. Now, one of them supposedly had already been placed. The people in Glen had gotten together and formed the Sleeping Squaw Heritage Society, and while the building was on the tax list, they were paying the taxes and expected to get the property by a tax deed in the mid-1970s. Well, the week the tax deed was supposed to be given to the group in the town of Scott, the courthouse received a deed given by somebody named Samuel Scott Jr. III in Columbia, South Carolina, for the property. It was being claimed by someone nobody knew. We weren't questioning that deed. It was too difficult and the time was too short. So Mr. Van Sant said, why don't we just go out and get at least one deed from a descendant of Samuel and Cornelia Scott that we can prove, and the more we can get, the better off we are claiming ownership of this building. So that's where the building is currently. Go ahead, Kate. So I made a quick stop here at the Historical Society and at the courthouse, where I obtained probate records of interest to the Scott family. And I went and met with the people who were interested in saving the building. This is the Town of Scott Town Hall. I sincerely regret that I didn't take a picture of the people at that meeting. They're all have passed except for 2 now. I explained to them how we could possibly prove through descendantship and could claim that building. They said, we don't have any money to do this, which was not surprising. Anything of a historical nature comes up these days as not having enough money. And, but I told them I would undertake a search for any of the descendants that I could find. Okay, Kate. I showed them this genealogy format that had appeared. Samuel Scott is the bright blue Scott, and those are his 13 children.
Whoa.
Whoa, it's right. So I thought, well, this can't be that hard. Had he had one or two, we might be in different shape, but he had 13 children. And what was fortuitous was the fact that, as you can see on the right down there, the far right, Nathaniel was one of the few that didn't marry, who stayed on the Scott farm, who died without issue, no children, and therefore his probate went to locate his brothers, sisters, nieces, and nephews who were living in 1901. That was our launching pad right there. And when I did a quick search, this was in the mid-1970s, and most of us are tied up with computer. Today, we jump on this with a computer, and no problem, right? So, no computers, at least not accessible to me at this time. This meant genealogy the old-fashioned way. Go to the courthouses, go to the cemeteries, go wherever you can find records for a family. So you'll notice that Samuel Jr., any place I have a black plus, it looked like there would what we call issue, children and grandchildren and going down there. Samuel Jr. family went to Huron County, Ohio. Jonathan, the eighth one, could be found in Allegheny County, New York. And on the far end, Ransom's children went to Jackson County, Michigan. So the week after I talked to the people in Scott, I left for a week on my vacation and went to first Allegheny County, New York to see if any of the Scott family was there. As you drive into Olean,
Yes.
a large billboard, Gordon Scott Real Estate.
Whoa.
Sounds like a good place to start.
That's right. There you go.
So I met him in his office. We talked about who his ancestors might be. He didn't know about this family tree, but we did hook him up to some of the pluses down here. And in fact, it was William's line. And he was very helpful, and I obtained 20 quitclaim deeds. These are people signing an indenture, a deed to property. They didn't know where it was, had never seen it, would probably never see it, and gave me signatures on those deeds, and we were off and running. I called Mr. Van Sant and told him this is going to be a piece of cake from here on out. And so from going to Allegheny County, I went down into Ohio to Huron County to the Firelands Museum and met people in cemeteries. There are so many small stories connected to this research. I would love to tell you a little bit about every one of them, but there just isn't enough time today to do that. Just let me say that these people were so generous, so concerned about a piece of property, a school that they didn't know anything else about. Okay. I had a book with me that showed pictures of the school classes that we already had pictures for, the location of the school at the edge of one of the Central New York's Finger Lakes. This is lake property. We're not talking about a building in the woods someplace off of a dirt road. We're talking about a piece of property on one of Central New York's Finger Lakes. And yet these people had no problem signing that deed and giving us a portion, whatever the portion was. Every time someone signed a deed, their portion was reduced all the way along. As I mentioned, I'm a little loud here, it was lake property, and I told them that. I showed them where it was, and I told them that it was considered lake property, and if they had any reservations, a couple did, and later signed a deed, but initially, just a couple of those. The indenture, we ended up with more than 50, and I told them that we didn't have any money to give them for their generosity. All I could give them would be a genealogy from the information that I was gathering at every stop I made. One person would tell me where his aunts and uncles lived, someone knew where somebody's granddaughter lived, and I just made my way along going down through Ohio. And I ended up gathering this information for a genealogy, which ended up being this book.
Wow.
Yes,
Wow.
it's considerable.
Great.
And I'm going to pick out one story. Barney Scott, here he's descended from Frank, this is out in Michigan. His grandfather was Ransom Scott, he was a lumberjack, that's what he went out there for, lumber. And when I talked to Barney Scott, his wife Roselle, they had 10 children. I spent part of an afternoon with them, explained what was going on, and that he was going to be my last stop. I was headed back to New York on a Sunday afternoon. And they treated me to turkey dinner. They packed me up with sandwiches to drive back to New York on Sunday afternoon, and left Michigan late in the afternoon and got into New York just in time to go to work the next morning. And I will return to the item called Ode to Samuel at the end of the program. But there were enough deeds, and they were filed when I got back, and we set up a meeting in 1978 for claiming the school. There were so many that we claimed the school. We changed the name to the Glen Historical Society. The Regents of the state of New York gave us a charter, and in August we got together and dedicated the school to Samuel and Cornelia Scott for their generosity to begin with, and of course to their descendants who were making it possible for us to preserve the school. Now, this is the one-room school, and one of the first things that we did, the group, I should say, we did, I did very little of this work. Keeping up with New York State regulations, the Homer Central School District had to tell folks here how to keep their school running, and they thought it would be better for if the walls and ceiling were painted white, which they did. They put in hung low-lying neon lights in the ceiling and several other things detracting from the original school. Go ahead, Kim. It has turned into a museum. Many people in the Scott area, along the lake folks, people in the town of Homer and the town of Scott, some of the descendants of Samuel Scott have placed items in this building. We've got quite a collection of different desks here. The schoolmarm's desk was found down under the building, and that was brought up and placed in where it should be. And we know where it should be because we have the last teacher here. Mrs. Green is here. She She taught at that desk for a good many years.
With the maiden name of Learn besides.
Yeah, yes, her
Yes.
name is Learn, and she was the teacher, was the last one-room school teacher up there. The one-room school was heated by a stove. I understand some students brought their lunch as a baked potato and put it on the top of the stove and baked their potato ready for lunch. And the one thing I will point out here is the flag, and that's the door that leads into the library. And this, there was a flag, a group who wanted a flag in the late 1800s. It involved the people who lived across the lake, or visited across the lake at the water cure, and the people who lived in the lake hollow. And they had a flag club because they wanted a special flag at the school. And that flag club turned into the library part of the school, and then there was the one-room school that needed to be replaced, the building that was on the lot. They spent 10 years kicking that football around, and which, as we know, that's what happened. You had two groups that each wanted their own. The library group wanted their own separate library, and the school people felt the school should be separate from the library. But after 10 years, they decided to put it under one roof, and a gentleman, an architect, who spent part of his summers, Eric Rossiter, spent part of his summers at the water cure across the lake. He's the one who designed the building. Bookcases of reference books that were available. Okay. There are storyboards now with items of interest to the building and the area. Different classes. People have showed up with pictures of their grandparents in these class pictures. On Saturdays, when the school is open in the summer, Mrs. Green tries to put in time on those July and August Saturdays to be there, and it's not unusual to have students. Several of her students come and visit and hear. Who is this? Is this Jennifer Grant? Dottie, you know? Do you remember?
No.
You don't remember who this is?
No, I don't.
She introduced herself. Is that who it is?
It is, yes.
And she brought her daughter. You can see her sitting down there in the desk. She came to talk. I think she talked about Mr. and Mrs. Mouse. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
That. Yeah. And that in and of itself is another story, Mr. and Mrs. Mouse. You'll find out about that when you visit the school. Go ahead, Kate. Outside is a pump. Water was pumped every morning and brought in by the students, put in the jug so that there would be water inside the school. And the generational special teaching experience comes with these students returning with their children in the summertime to visit and have Mrs. Green there to talk about how one-room schools operated.
Are a lot of these the original furnishings?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Especially these here, these double seats. And the kids just seem to enjoy it. They seem to absorb what's going on. They have interesting questions. They're not just running around in the building or doing anything. They come in and they seem to want to touch the desks and sit and see what it's like from there. And this is on the wall in the library. It's relative to the building being built and opened in 1901, and it's for the higher service of this community and in faithful remembrance of some who have loved Glen Haven. This building has been erected by the people of this district and many generous friends in the year 1901, and that was all repeated in 1977. This is the what the inside of the library looks like. This is back, you can see over here on the left going through where the school is, and this part is the library, which is about as much of this room right here. This constitutes about the size of the library. Go ahead, Kate. And it's a lending library. You can borrow books and bring them back. They're open on Saturday, borrow books, and children come and get books, write their name in the record, and read them, bring them back the following week. This is 1963. This is just 5 years before the school closed. Mrs. Green is up there in the back, and these are children that were in the school. One of those children was Mrs. Green's daughter, who... Are you in that picture?
Actually, I was beyond
It
that
just
time,
our-
but
my
my
son.
brother's in there right by the pole.
Oh, your brother's
Right
there.
next
Oh,
to the...
yeah, wasn't it?
Yeah, she taught, Mrs. Green taught two of her children too. The anchor that also has been resurrected from the bottom of Skaneateles Lake hangs in the side yard. Go ahead. It belonged on the ship that you see in the foreground there. The Glenhaven steamer came down from Skaneateles to the Glenhaven Hotel and Water Cure that was on the lake on the far side. The school in this picture is not that big white building, but the kids on the teeter-totter in the small corner down here on the right. But this painting is on a bed sheet. It was done in 1854. Is on a bed sheet from the hotel. This artist did this, and a copy of it has been given and is to the school. Now, whenever you get yourself involved, people want to conserve and preserve. They have that, I think it's an innate thing. We want to conserve and preserve the things we know and have loved and have taken care of. But the Homer Central School District was taking care of it before school closed. Once the school closed, you have a building to take care of. Dues, $5 a year, and the sale of books on the porch, don't do it. There are other issues. There is the roof, the gutters, the glass and mullions, the foundation, decks, railings, septic, yard maintenance, insurance, keeping up with New York State rules and regulations, even though it isn't a historical site, isn't a school anymore, but a historical site. And all of those features come here. You can see all of the different things that need to be upkeep. So in 1977, we were a historical society, and we needed to upkeep the building. And someone had the lovely creative idea of having every other year a biannual dinner and a silent auction. Biannual, just enough. This is we've held it appropriately, the Glenhaven Hotel, on Monday night when they're usually closed. Their seating is limited to 100, and we have never had any extra. People are always looking for tickets at the last minute, people who aren't going to come. So that the $50 dinner ticket is half to the school, and then the money they raise on the silent auction that operates all during the dinner. As you can see, the porch is full all the way around, and there's, as I said, usually 90 to 100 people there. Lake people from Homer, Cortland. We have new generations now that take care and look after the school. we're almost 50 years out from the original group that wanted to preserve this school. And so there are new people stepping forward on the board of directors with new ideas and taking care of things. Sometimes the former students are involved. One of Mrs. Hudson's daughters there in yellow, she's been very involved in what's taking care of the school. Always new involvement and new ideas on how, and the building itself is in great shape, let me tell you. They've done a wonderful job. And again, even at the dinner, there are former students who come and talk to Mrs. Green. The new president, Phil Tennant, is ringing the school bell to let people know that it's time for the last silent auction sign-ups. That people needed to go in if they wanted to check to see if the item they wanted was, they were the winning bidder. Mrs. Green and her family attend the dinner. This is just you have probably questions to ask me. I have quite a few things to go by, and I must have knocked a slide out of there. No, I must have done it when I set something up. No. As I said, the book with the genealogy came out to about this size, and all the little pink slips in here are stories or people that I ran into and know and who remembered me at Christmas. There's a woman in here named Maisie Drake that lived way up on a hill in Pennsylvania, and I met her, and when I went to get her deed signed, she and I just sat all afternoon and talked. And from that day on until she passed, I got a Christmas card, an Easter card, and a birthday card from her. Every time, just people. And I showed you when Barney Scott came from Michigan. He didn't sign the deed when I first talked to him that Sunday afternoon. He came the next year. They were camping, and he came down, and Mrs. Hudson called me and said, "We've got a Scott who wants to sign a deed." So I got in the car and drove up, and Barney Scott was there with his wife and some of his children, and he sat at the school desk and signed the deed. Yes, I have a picture. No, I can't find it. But I'm going to make an extra effort. And it was wonderful to have them there. And within a couple of weeks, I got a letter from Mrs. Scott. And in it was a poem. I thought I had it. It should have come up, but I didn't. So now I'm going to have to turn it around. I've had it mounted like this. Let me read it to you. This is Ode to Samuel. He came into Cortland counties from Cayuga's wooded hills, and he settled in the Glen with his family and his mills. Then in time he told his neighbors, "Take a portion of my land. It's a place to build a schoolhouse for as long as it shall stand." The long years came and went, and the family did the same, till in time there was no person there who carried Samuel's name. When the monster labeled progress gobbled up the country schools, those who tried to slow its course were called sentimental fools. But there's dignity in memories and pride in eras past, and Samuel's true descendants want his heritage to last. May they rally to the cause, raise their voices by the score, to preserve the little schoolhouse that belonged to District 4. Isn't that wonderful? I just cried. I couldn't. I called her back. I didn't write to her. I said, "Where did you come up with this? Why?" She says, "This goes in my head when I'm working in the garden." She says, "I do a lot of this." She says, "I go out in my garden and things like this come up, and there isn't a line in here that doesn't have a direct impact on this school."
Lovely.
As I said, there's lots of other little stories. So there's some things that I didn't, oh yes, Mrs. Green here once. There weren't
You
any,
can take it out of it. I don't care.
there weren't any any prepared certificates graduating from the school. So Mrs. Green, who is an artist, had set up this certificate with the school on it, and it was filled out. Every single one was
From
filled
sixth
out
grade.
by hand for everyone who.
Sixth grade, when it was the sixth, they graduated from sixth grade.
They graduated from
up there,
sixth
and
grade.
I wanted to make it important.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was, and I'm sure you'll find it hanging in several offices of people who had gone on to better and higher things.
But I didn't have a copier, so I didn't run it through.
Right. Every
So
one of
I
them was
had
done
to
by
draw
hand.
each one separately.
No copier. See, this was all by the way projects and genealogy and all these things used to be, were hands-on.
When this
That's right,
project
hands-on.
started, they had closed the doors with her schoolwork still there. I remember walking in, and there was a room divider, or a bulletin board, and it had a felt little black Sambo still attached to it, from her, whatever her lesson was at the time. And they just shut the door, and it was, the stuff was still there.
We weren't allowed to read Black Sandals.
Well, in '68, I don't know,
We
but,
weren't allowed to pray, but we did.
because it was still there. I remember going, I must have been 8 or 9, I think, when this project started, or 10. I don't know.
Yeah. If you have questions, it's something that particular that I didn't touch on.
Can I get a picture of that?
Hmm?
Can I get a picture of that?
Oh.
A picture? Can I make a picture of that?
Your diploma. Can she make a picture of your diploma?
Diploma?
No, my son has one in his
No,
office.
can
no,
she take a
can
picture,
I take a
get a
picture?
copy of it? Can she take a picture of it
Oh,
or get a
yes,
copy of it?
yes. It can be run through a copier nowadays. I just couldn't when I did
Oh my
that.
gosh, that's gorgeous.
It's beautiful.
Well, I thank you very much for your interest in coming, and please keep in mind, on Saturday afternoons in the summer, you would be surprised at the number of people who have found us, come down through that Glen and park. A man in a truck stopped. I was out doing something with the books on the porch, and he stopped his truck, and he got out of the truck and he walked toward me. So I walked toward him, and he said, "Is this that school museum?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can my children go in?" Yes. You know, they had a wonderful time. He was there probably at least an hour, if not more, just past summer. And
It's going back in time.
yes, it's a step back in time, and it's just well kept and well preserved and well loved.
Are there flyers that would give where it is and directions and all that? Are there flyers that?
Why don't you write your name on this and we'll make sure you get information.
When you go to Scott and go up 41,
We have a website.
there's there's an intersection as you just go into Scott proper. Take the left and go down the hill.
Head
Down the hill, all the way down the hill, to the bottom where it's flat, and drive straight on, and you'll see it on your left. Yeah.
And if you miss it, you're in the lake.
See it. I'm wondering,
It is a lovely.
what would be the harm in having copies of that lovely poem
Oh, yeah.
available to the public? They
Oh,
would never know about that.
yeah,
They would never know about that.
yeah, I think I put it in
A
each one.
talented person obviously spent time enough to write it, and
Yeah, she
It's
did,
just lovely.
and the calligraphy was done by one of the Cortland Police Department policemen that I was working with at the time.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, Michael Parko did the,
Mary, there's a copy in the school too.
yes, there is, there's a copy in the school, but We can make copies of it and have it there if, yes, that's an excellent idea. We'll have that.
It hangs in the bedroom.
Yeah,
We also have monthly programs in the summertime, and there's a book group that meets monthly, and at the end of the season, there's a Halloween party. It's an old fashioned.
yeah. So it's very active. That's the other thing, you know, some of these things get off the ground and go off like fireworks, and then they kind of just drift down and drift away because the people who it meant the most to, you know, have passed or will. And, but there's just new blood in the area, on the lake, people who come across us. So,
But I think it's important to know the history of it, and that's,
yeah,
I like to have that reviewed every once in a while.
every once in a while that needs to be reviewed, yes.
There are field trips that we have sometimes from local schools.
Right, the local schools, actually the school can be opened anytime by appointment. If you happen to belong to a group who would like to go, we can open the school up by appointment too, at any time. And we do get classes, school classes, elementary school classes and things.
What happened to the person with the first deed? Did he just fizzle out?
With the first deed,
The one that came in to try to scoop it away?
the person who, I can't tell you whose name on the deed was. He's just out of the picture. But it was from Samuel Scott Jr. III of Columbia, South Carolina. I went to Columbia, South Carolina. I went to his father's house. The young man who claimed to be a descendant of this family wasn't home. His father was very edgy about the whole thing, but I just left with telling him that we had 30 more deeds. Tell his son the next time he sees him, we have 30 more deeds for this property. And the local person who wanted the school, he has since passed. He never showed up. He never came to identify himself as an owner of the school. He just disappeared. But he was important because he kicked it off. That's usually what happens with historical projects. All of a sudden, the threat comes up and people coalesce and get together and do good things. Thank you very much.
Thank you.